sergeants could call the offices of the absent members to let them know that we're getting started. The agenda that you have, I'm proposing to change slightly to accommodate the Department of Healthcare Services, which has asked if we could take the items in the following order in order that several of their managers and leaders can participate in a conference call or meeting later today on an item that's also budget related. So the order we're going to hear these items in, we'll start with issue number 1, which is item 4265, and then we'll go to issue 4300 or item 4300. Then we'll go to item 4260, then we'll go to item 4280, and then we'll end with item 4440, which is the Department of Managed Health. So that's the order. Seeing no objection, because there's nobody else here. It makes it a lot easier to run the committee. Oh, yeah, and so item 4265 is vote only, so we are going to actually start at this moment with item 4300, which is the Department of Developmental Services, and invite the representatives from that department to the witness table. And I don't know if it's possible to remove the giant central rostrum there, but if it is possible to do that, that might make it a little bit easier, because I don't think we'll be using that for this hearing. And then all the committee members can see the witnesses. I appreciate the sergeants doing that. Thank you very much. So why don't we begin with issue number 1 and hear from the department on issue number 1, which is under item 4300. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Terry Delgadillo. I'm the Director of the Department of Developmental Services, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. The budget for the department for the May revise has a number of minor adjustments, but the first issue before you is one that was put forward in the January governor's budget. Last year, as part of the budget changes, the Department of Developmental Services worked with our community, and the department put forward a number of budget reductions to achieve $334 million in savings in the general fund. It resulted in 25 different changes. In addition to that, the department, the administration put forward a 3% payment reduction for providers. In the governor's January budget, the department was directed to identify $25 million in additional savings above the savings that was adopted already. And the $25 million in the spring the administration proposed would be achieved through an additional 1.25% payment reduction in provider and provider payments and regional center operations. That's the first item before you today. It was heard previously by the committee. However, at that time, the administration had not put forward trailer bill language that we were recommending that would allow for some provider relief to address the fact of these reductions. They've had their rates frozen for many, many years, and these payment reductions have been very difficult for them. So we recommended that there be provider relief available in cases where the health and safety of the consumer would not be at risk, and that it would not result in somebody being placed in a more restrictive environment. So the item before you today, I believe, is also the trailer bill language, which the committee had not previously considered.
Okay. Anything from the LAO?
Mr. Chair, Greg Jolivet with the Legislative Analyst's Office. It's as Director Delgadillo said, the rates had not been increased for many years. This is a difficult reduction, but we think that if the legislature is going to further reduce the regional center budget, this is a good way to do it. You can be assured that the savings would be accomplished.
Okay, Finance. Anything from Finance? No one from Finance. It's a happy day in the legislature. The Finance Department is absent. Let's plunge ahead. Any members of the public who would wish to testify on this particular item and issue?
Mr. Chairman, do you want us up or on
You know, you can do it right there. That'd be great.
Mr. Chairman and no members. Dwight Hansen, on behalf of the California Disability Services Association, our organization represents providers throughout the state that provide a wide range of services. We oppose the 1.25% rate cut. It's important for the committee to be aware that the cumulative impact in general fund alone from the rate cuts going back to October of 2008 have now exceeded $500 million. $500 million in general fund alone. Another $250 to $300 million have been lost in federal funds. This system has lost its elasticity. The rate freezes are one thing, but these takeaways have become devastating. This cut is across the board, and it will attack programs that also took heavy cuts in the last round. Programs like respite programs and others that were eliminated or reduced significantly would take yet another cut. We recognize that you have to find this $25 million. But if you go along with the 1.25% rate cut, it's not $25 million, it's $43 million, because you also walk away from the federal funds as well. So it's a $43 million cut in addition to all of those other cuts to save general fund. We believe there's a better alternative. Also in the governor's budget is an allocation of $36 million to the regional centers to provide case management services for a group of 17,000 infants 0 to 2 who lost eligibility for services. This program was designed to allow those families to at least see somebody and be referred to someplace else, some other generic service, so-called generic service, where they might receive services. At the time the budget number was put in there last year, they expected to serve 17,000 children. Only 3,000 families have actually come in and signed up. Yet in this budget, they've allocated $36 million for the full year. We believe that you should allocate no more to the prevention program, that it will actually cost the regional centers to do that work. 3,000 people can be served for roughly $5 million. Instead of the 1.25%, we would argue that you allocate the $5 million to the prevention program and take the $25 million out of the over-allocation that would otherwise go. $36 million reduced by 5 is $31 million. It's a win-win all the way around, and we can avoid these deep cuts. Thank you.
I'm wondering if the department and the LAO might respond to that.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to respond. As I mentioned to you, last year we did go through budget reductions that achieved $334 million in general fund savings, and as they were very, very difficult cuts that spread throughout our entire system. And as part of that, the Early Start program, which serves babies, was reduced, and we created this prevention program to make sure that no babies would fall through the cracks. In addition, many of the other proposals that were put into place have not achieved the anticipated savings. These babies that go to the prevention program were babies in Early Start that we anticipated would need a lower level of service. When they went back, when the regional centers went back and reviewed each individual case, they identified that indeed they needed the higher level of service. So those babies have stayed in the Early Start program, and there are expenditures in that program that were not anticipated because we had anticipated savings. So as a result of that, if you take this $25 million out of the prevention program and put it to fund the additional 25 that we need to achieve in savings, we're still going to have a hole in our budget of $25 million. It's just going to be in another place.
Well, but the point that the gentleman made was that there's an undersubscription and only $5 million has been expended.
Actually, these babies are already being served by our system, and the assumption was that these babies could get a lower level of service. But when they were evaluated, they determined that they could not get a lower level of service, so they continue to get a higher level of service that wasn't budgeted for. So the remaining money is being used to...
So what's the aggregate cost that you anticipate having to incur in order to serve the babies?
The savings
in the budget year.
The savings that we had originally anticipated was for all of the changes in Early Start, and it assumed less babies would get the Early Start program. Since that has not transpired, those babies are still getting services that were not fully budgeted in our budget. So in the current year, we believe, as part of our entitlement program, that we will live within budget. But if this money wasn't in our budget, we would have a hole somewhere else.
But living within budget is different from answering my question as to what do you think is the cost associated with this cohort of babies?
I guess a couple things. One is if you're looking at the cohort of the babies that are in the program now, there are about 3,000, and the number is increasing. There's been about 4,200 served since the program was put in place, and we anticipate that that population is going to continue to go this way. So instead of going in the more costly program, they're going to go into prevention. Right now, today, we did not give the regional centers all of the money for the prevention program. We withheld it, and we're using that money to fund them because they didn't go into prevention. So the money's being spent today for the babies that were going to go in prevention, but they're getting higher levels of service.
Okay, but I'm still adrift because I haven't been given a figure.
I don't. Where's Mark? For the budget year, we assumed $36 million for the prevention program. And unlike our entitlement, it is a grant program. And the grant program was to serve 17,000 babies in the budget year. And it also assumed that a percentage of the money would go to family resource centers. If you're asking what the cost is of serving the babies that are in there today,
3,000.
I think about 10 to 12 million has been provided to the family resource centers and to the regional centers to serve all the babies today and all the babies that will come in between now and the end of the fiscal year, and their families.
Okay, thank you. Let's hear more from the public.
Mr. Jones. And Mr. Bill, good morning. Greg DeGier, representing the ARC of California, the largest membership association in the state, speaking for people with intellectual and all developmental disabilities and their families. Your subcommittee has held hearings on the effects, including the cumulative effects of the disastrous cuts that the legislature and the governor made last year. I don't have to go into that, I don't think. We are against the further 25%, $25 million cut in general funds on top of the 3% cut from last year, and which includes loss to the system of in state and federal funds of $160 million this year. It's a fragile system. There are providers who will go out of business, who are already moving in that direction. We are against that. We are against it. One of the best arguments against it, I think, is the administration's proposed trailer bill language for the so-called provider relief that you've heard about before. We saw it for the first time yesterday. This will hurt consumers. It'll help the bottom line of the providers, including some of our chapters are providers. So that's a good thing. It might stop some of them from going out of business. It might stop some of them from having to drop programs. But it would be at the cost of hurting the consumers. So we're definitely against that. There's language in there that attempts to protect the health and safety of consumers, makes exceptions, but we don't think you can write a regulation or control language or a trailer bill language that's strong enough to actually do the job. The system has been in chaos ever since the cuts last year. I think you know about the problems with the weakening of the IPP process that we're trying to correct with trailer bill language or legislation this year. Even if it is part of the individual program plan process, as it should be, for a lot of consumers, it's the IPP team who make the decision consists of the consumer, someone who has a cognitive disability, has no parents, no other advocates. He or she is there by themselves. Someone from the regional center who's under great pressure from the state to cut costs, and the service provider whose income depends on not being required to keep the state standards of the staffing ratios. There's no way, no matter how you write the regulations, that there are not people who are going to be put in unsafe and unhealthy positions under this proposal. We don't think it can be worked out between now and Wednesday. We don't think it can be worked out at all, frankly. We're against it and should not be part of this. Let me add, on the subject of the prevention program, we're also against taking that $25 million out of the prevention program. We do think it's there. It's money that was intended for the prevention program, has not gone for that. It was a part of what the prevention program was supposed to do, was to purchase services for these babies who are excluded from the Early Start program, of whom there are many. There are maybe not as many as the budget had assumed last year, but there are many who are excluded who some of this money was to go to purchase service for them. That's not happening. This money is there. It's tempting to say, let's take this, what looks like money that's sitting there not being used for anything, and use it to fill the $25 million gap. We're against that. We think that it should be used for what it's intended for, to serve the babies, to try to mitigate somewhat this disastrous cut that was imposed last year on the IPP. It is tempting to say that and to say take it out of there. And in fact, we were saying something similar to that not very long ago, until Senator Leno, God bless him, and God bless you too.
God bless us one and all. I'm going to have to ask you to bring it to a close.
Raised our hopes a couple of weeks ago by saying he's against any further cuts. Enough is enough. That's where we are too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was very helpful.
Hi. Honorable Chair and members, thank you for having this hearing. My name is Connie Lapin. I have a son who has severe autism that's 42, and I'm here representing families from the Alliance of California Autism Organizations. And as one of our members says, our disabilities can't be legislated or unfunded away. I watched the Assembly hearing at home. I'm from Southern California, and it feels good to be here. And of course, I won't take that much time, but it means a lot that you, as members, have declared a sensitivity to the kinds of issues that we're facing. My son and our family have seen terrible crises where there hasn't been money. I do realize this one's a biggie, but I am standing here with many families to say this is the original Lanterman Act that we want to stay. We want it to stay, that was signed, and that we will do everything in our DNA to protect services for our consumers and families. The good news is, I want to say something positive before I say something negative, is that you are having hearings, and I talk about a preamble to our Lanterman Constitution about transparency, and I made a joke, almost there's too many hearings. I'm glad that we can tell you how we feel. And there's action. You looked at the exception process, and with notice, that's a really important thing because there has to be health and safety issues. And you talked about the IPP, but we still need help. We all know, and you don't want to be part of the heavy price of unintended consequences. So fiscal responsibility, I have learned, means do no harm. And cost effective, one of my friends said, do it right the first time. So what I'm begging you for is whatever comes out, and I hope it's not what's been proposed, that there's sunset language. It's time limited, and so there can be course correction. We need to have flexibility and respite so that people can choose camp instead of respite. The prevention funding program has been talked about. There's some issues with that. I got the trailer bill language. I serve on the budget advisory group with the Department of Developmental Services. I got the language yesterday late, and I have big problems with it. I would want to de-link any kind of cut with any kind of regulatory relief. I sit on that committee. In fact, they named a committee, maybe after me, it's called the BLUH committee, like streamline business practices. You know, please, regulatory relief, but not this way. I read it. I couldn't find a consumer or family mentioned in the legislation. I couldn't find the IPP process. My son has lived through warehousing and reinstitutionalization, over-medication, and evidence-based torture. It's not cost-effective. That's why we're closing Lanterman. We've learned that. It's easier to do home care, look at home care cuts, and not close larger facilities. We don't want to do that. Laws will be violated. There was a Wall Street Journal article in the paper today that talked about how cuts are happening throughout the country, and they're really bad. But here's what's interesting, and because we do want to be cost-effective. It said, the Wall Street Journal today, that in 1993, the average Medicaid cost per person was $48,500. At the end of 2008, the average cost was $55,000. But if you adjust for inflation, it actually represents a 23% change, negative change, and it's because people are living out of institutions.
So I'm going to ask you to wrap it up and,
yes,
and really direct your attention to this specific proposal, because
that is the trailer bill language is and the automatic cut is very worrisome. So we're counting on you to be vigilant and protect us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for traveling all the way here from Southern California. Welcome.
Boyd Bradshaw, president of Res Coalition, which is a residential service providers business league. We provide, actually, I'm here representing about 1,200 residential service providers throughout California. We are here for two reasons. First, to express extreme concern about this 1.25% cut. You need to understand that if we get this 1.25% cut, you're going to take us back to pre-2001 rates. We are in the position where we're having to deal with all these fiscal increases, everything from wage costs to labor costs to utility costs to even our mortgage costs have all increased, and you're going to put us back. We are in the situation where in Southern California we're having an epidemic of facilities closing because they cannot meet their needs already and they can't cover their costs, and this is going to continue to escalate if we don't resolve it. Now, there has been the proposal to go ahead and utilize some sort of administrative relief in the current trailer bill language is an attempt to do that. We're encouraging you to deny this trailer bill language. If we read it specifically, it says except for licensed or certified residential providers. It specifically excludes us. And then down below it says the department may suspend 3 additional area. We can't reduce our staffing ratios. That would simply be a risk of the health and safety of the consumers we're serving, so that's out. Which only leaves the last one, which is the quarterly and semi-annual progress reports. 2/3 of our residential care facilities do not even do this, so they're achieving no net administrative relief from these proposed cuts. We need to look at other options. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Holly Fermini, Platinum Advisors on behalf of the United Association of California Care Providers. They're also like the Res Coalition, a group of residential care providers and day program providers in the East Bay area. And for several of the reasons stated before, we are truly opposed to the additional rate reductions. And we hope that we should be working on the mitigation measures and cost savings measures before the rate reductions, not in exchange for the rate reductions. In addition, we think that every provider nobody should be exempted from any rate reductions. That should be across the board. But again, we encourage you to try to look for the ways we can save money on the cost of doing business and make those cuts first and those savings first before you consider an additional rate reduction.
Good afternoon, panel. My name is Karen Duncanwood, and I used to live in Southern California. I now live in Butte County. I have a 35-year-old son with significant CP who lives in the community the last 9 years due to supported living services. I am testifying to please ask you not to do this cut again. We are seeing very real effects on people we know about these cuts. There will be an increased turnover of staff. You can expect decreased oversight. You can expect increased threats to people's health. My son has a 7-inch scar on his arm, for poor oversight already of an old agency he fired. We see these cuts as parents of children who are not children, who are adults and have the same rights as I do and you do and everybody else does to live in the community, safely participate and contribute to the community. We see this as a threat to community living, an opposition to the ADA's call for least restrictive environment living, and in opposition to the lessons of the Olmstead decision. Please do not do this. The rates have been frozen so far that we're seeing the effects directly. I know several people, myself personally, just in the last 2 months, that have suffered because of inadequate funding already. Thank you.
Thank you.
Evelyn Abu Hassan with Disability Rights California. We're a cross-disability organization, and we're statewide. I just want to make some general comments, and I've said these in other hearings, just for the record. We really understand the difficult financial situation our state is in. We understand that some very difficult decisions have to be made. We also appreciate the department's hard work to bring in some additional funds into our system. That being said, we have some ongoing concerns with the fragility of the community. The community is very fragile, and any ongoing reductions just makes it very difficult to keep folks in the community and out of institutions. And those are just a couple comments that I'd like to make. We have provided written testimony in the past. We're more than happy to provide you more in the future. But just for the record, wanted to go on record saying that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, committee members, Bob Baldo, Executive Director of the Association of Regional Center Agencies. A number of our members have issues with the proposed 1.25% reduction. And I'm not sure what the best way to do that is given the overall state budget situation. However, I did want to be clear on one point, and that is the prevention program. We're opposed to those who want to shift money out of the prevention program to take care of the 1.25% reduction. This program is going to grow. We estimate, our ARC estimates that there will be about over 12,000 people being served by this program in the next fiscal year. This is not a static program. It's a program that where children move in and out of the program, and so you're going to have more than 3,000 at one time in a given fiscal year. We think it'll be at least 12,000. And there are other people who are being served in the Early Start program that didn't transfer to the prevention program that are incurring costs right now also. So for those reasons, the money should not be transferred out of the prevention program.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members, Rick Rollins. I'm here today as a member of the DDS Budget Advisory Committee group representing the Autism Community, along with Connie Lapin. I'm here again to urge your disapproval of any move of monies away from the prevention program for any other purposes than for what it was intended to do. This program is extremely important to families with young children, particularly with autism, and we strongly urge your denial of any request to move the money away from the program. Thank you.
Thank you. So my recommendation to the committee is that we not approve this request of the administration. We leave the item open. Let me see if there are any comments from members of the committee. Mr. Bell.
I don't want to go into it deeply, but I basically agree with Senator Leno that these programs should not be cut. I think that they will only inevitably lead to further costs to the state in the long term. Again, it's another situation where we're just sort of, the ship's sinking and we're shoving the disabled and the children aside so other people can get on the lifeboats. That's the way I describe it. And therefore, I think there has to be other areas that we look at, and the other areas could include a more balanced approach to the budget than has been proposed. This cut, in my mind, was made last year by the governor when he blue penciled a lot of the programs, and again he's coming back at the same programs that he blue penciled. He's continually targeting the disabled, and they have received the brunt of his blue pen, his proposals, and most of the people that are families are just sick and tired of it, and so therefore I'm for no cuts.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move to the next issue, but before we do so, I think we now have a quorum, so I'm going to ask the consultant to call the roll of the committee to establish the quorum.
Jones.
Here.
Bell. Chesbro. Delatorre. Emerson. Nestandi.
Members, we do have a consent calendar, which is on the first page of your agenda packet. Items 4300, 4260, 4265, 4140, and 4440. There's a motion from Mr. Emerson. Is there a second? It's a second from Mr. Bell on the consent calendar. Let's go ahead and call the roll on the consent calendar.
Jones.
Aye.
Bell. Chesbro. Delatorre. Emerson. Nestandi.
Okay, so that is adopted. Let's move now to issue number 2 under the Department of Developmental Services, and that's the Regional Center ECP adjustment. Members, page 15 of your agenda packet.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and members, the May revision budget does reflect a change in our population. We update it every May, and in this case, we actually have a reduction in our Early Start program that is identified here. What we have seen is over the last 2 years, there's been a lower birth rate in California, and as a result of that, we are seeing a slight decline in the people accessing the program. In addition, as I mentioned earlier, we did all of the budget reforms or reductions last year, and we think that because there were so many changes in the area of early start, that there was some confusion in the community about the services that were available. We did see a lull or a decrease in intake. We are now seeing that trend changing and starting back up, but our budget has been adjusted accordingly for the current year and the budget year to reflect actual population.
Very good. So the action I'm recommending is that we adopt the estimated changes for enrollment, caseload, and population, which is something that's done in the matter of course each year when the May revision is provided. We check quickly to see if there's any members of the public who wish to testify. As a motion from Mr. Emerson, a second from Mr. Bell. If there's no further discussion by the committee, let's call the roll.
Jones.
Aye.
Bell. Chesbro. Delatorre. Emerson. Nestandy.
Okay, that motion passes. Issue number 3, which is the Prop 10 First 5 backfill issue.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and members, in the budget for the current year and for the budget year, there was an assumption that the department would be able to receive Prop 10 funding to serve babies that are in our system that, that meet the criteria. In the current year, we were successful in receiving $50 million from the State Prop 10 Commission. And in the budget year, in January, there was an assumption that there'd be a ballot initiative to transfer $255 million from the program into our budget. That ballot initiative was not placed on the ballot. The May revise assumes that that money is backfilled with general fund with the exception of the $50 million. In the current year, we did get the money from the commission. The May revise assumes that we'll be successful in getting it again next year, but they have not yet approved it for budget year 10-11. We'd have to go back to the commission.
LAO or Finance, any comments? The action I'm recommending is that we adopt the proposal to backfill by using $205 million of general funds to
Our program is an entitlement program, and it's available to people that meet the criteria in terms of areas of development.